Graduate English student at North Carolina State. I interviewed her husband, who's a professor. Met her 2 children. Beautiful little kids. 1 and 3 years old. God damn this bastard. The agent started to choke up. I could see the wristwatch, and the ribbon that tied back her hair had come undone and rested on her shoulder. She was no longer beautiful. What was left of her was bloated and suffused. The odor of decomposition was pungent, even out in the open air. The empty sockets seemed to be staring up into a crescent-shaped opening at the tops of the pine trees, and I wondered what her eyes had looked at last. I tried to imagine Casanova cavorting around in these deep, dark woods before we had arrived. I took a guess that he was in his 20s or 30s and physically strong. I was afraid for Scoochie. More than I had been, in fact. Casanova, the world's greatest lover. God save us. Chapter 15. It was well past 10 o'clock, and we were still at the grisly, highly disturbing murder scene. The dazzling amber headlights of official cars and emergency vehicles were used to illuminate a foot-worn path into the shadowy woods. It was getting colder outside. The chill night wind was a gritty slap in the face. The corpse still hadn't been moved. I watched the Bureau's technicians dutifully strip-search the woods, collecting forensic clues and taking measurements. The immediate area had been cordoned off, but I made a sketch in the dim light and took my own preliminary notes. I was trying to remember what I could about the original Casanova, 18th-century adventurer, writer, libertine. I had read parts of his memoirs somewhere along the line. Beyond the obvious, why had the killer chosen the name? Did he believe that he truly loved women? Was this his way of showing it? We could hear a bird somewhere let out an unearthly scream, and also the sounds of small animals all around us. Nobody thought of Bambi in these woods, not under the circumstances of the gruesome murder. Between 10:30 and 11, we heard a loud roar like thunder in the eerie woods. Nervous eyes looked up into the blue-black sky. "There's a familiar old tune," Sampson said as he saw the fluttering lights of an incoming helicopter approaching from the northeast. "Probably Metaflight finally coming for the body," I said. A dark blue helicopter with gold stripes finally swirled down onto the blacktop highway. Whoever was piloting the copter in was a real pro. "Not Metaflight," Sampson said. "More likely be Mick Jagger. Big stars travel in copters like that one." Joyce Kinney and the regional bureau director were already headed back to the highway. Sampson and I followed along like uninvited pests. We received another rude shock right away. Both of us recognized the tall, balding, distinguished-looking man who stepped from the helicopter. "Now, what the hell is he doing down here?" Sampson said. I had the same question, the same uneasy reaction. It was the deputy director of the FBI, the number 2 man, Ronald Burns. Burns was a real hummer inside the Bureau, a big-time cage rattler. We both knew Burns from our last multi-jurisdictional case. He was supposed to be political, a bad guy inside the Bureau. But he had never been that way with me. After he had looked at the body, he asked to speak to me. It was getting stranger and stranger down in Carolina. Burns wanted to hold our little talk away from the big ears and small minds of his own people. "Alex, I'm sorry to hear your niece might have been kidnapped. I hope that isn't the case," he said. "Since you're down here, maybe you can help us out." "Can I ask why you're down here?" I said to Burns. Might as well skip right to the $64,000 question. Burns smiled, showing off his capped, very white front teeth. "I do wish you had accepted our offer of that VICAP position." I had been offered a job as a liaison between the Bureau and the D.C. police after the Sonergy kidnapping case. Burns was one of the men who interviewed me. "I like directness more than anything in a senior officer," Burns continued. I was still waiting for an answer to my direct question. "I can't tell you as much as you'd like to hear," Burns finally said. I will tell you that we don't know if your niece was taken by this sick Johnny. He leaves very little physical evidence, Alex. He's careful, and he's good at what he does. So I've heard. Leads us into some obvious areas for suspects. Policemen, army vets, amateurs who study the police. That could be misdirection on his part, though. Maybe he wants us to think that way. Burns nodded. I'm here because this has become a high-priority mess. It's large, Alex. I can't tell you why at this time. It's classified large. Spoken like a true FBI honcho. Mysteries wrapped in more mysteries. Burns sighed. I will tell you one thing. We believe that he might be a collector. We think he could be keeping a few of the young women nearby. A private harem, maybe. His very own harem. It was a scary, startling idea. It also gave me hope that Naomi might still be alive. I want to be in on this, I told Burns, holding eye contact with him. Why don't you tell me everything? I gave him my terms. I need to see the whole picture before I start giving out any theories. Why does he reject some of the women, if that's what he's doing? Alex, I can't tell you any more right now, I'm sorry. Burns shook his head and half-closed his eyes for a second. I realized that he was exhausted. But you wanted to see how I would react to your collector theory? I did, Burns admitted, and finally had to smile. A modern-day harem would be possible, I guess. It's a common enough male fantasy, I told him. Strangely, it's a prevalent female fantasy, too. Don't rule that out yet. Burns catalogued what I'd said and left it at that. He asked me to help again, but was unwilling to tell me everything he knew. He finally walked back to be with his own people. Samson came up beside me. What did his rigidness have to say? What brings him to this unholy forest with us mere mortals? He said something interesting. Said that Casanova might be a collector, maybe creating his own private harem somewhere near here, I told Samson. He said the case is large, his choice of words. Large meant it was a very bad case, probably worse than it already seemed. I wondered how that could be, and I almost didn't want to know the answer. Chapter 16. Kate McTiernan was lost in an odd but nicely illuminating thought. When the strike of a hawk breaks the body of its prey, she considered, it's only because of timing. That was the insight from her latest kata in black belt class. Exquisite timing was everything in karate, and also in so many other things. It also helped if you could bench press almost 200 pounds, which she could. Kate dawdled along busy, funky, rambunctious Franklin Street in Chapel Hill. The street ran north and south, bordering the picturesque campus of the University of North Carolina. She passed bookstores, pizza shops, rollerblade rentals, Ben & Jerry's ice cream. The rock group White Zombie was blaring from the ice cream store. Kate wasn't a dawdler by nature, but the evening was warm and pleasant, so she stopped to window shop for a change. The college town crowd was familiar, friendly, and very comfortable. She loved her life here, first as a medical student and now as an intern. She never wanted to leave Chapel Hill, never wanted to go back and be a doctor in West Virginia. But she would go. It was her promise to her mother, just before Beadsy McTiernan died. Kate had given her word, and her word was good. She was old-fashioned about things like that, a small-town mensch. Kate's hands were thrust into the deep pockets of a slightly wrinkled hospital medical jacket. She thought that her hands were her bad feature. They were gnarled, and she had no fingernails to speak of. There were two reasons for that: her job as slave labor at the cancer ward, and her avocation as a second-degree black belt, a nidan. It was the one tension releaser she allowed herself. Karate class was her R&R. The name pin on the upper left pocket of her jacket said, K. McTiernan, M.D. She liked the tiny irreverence of wearing that symbol of status and prestige with her baggy pants and the sneakers. She didn't want to seem like a rebel, and she really wasn't, but she needed to keep some small individuality inside the large hospital community. Kate had just picked up a paperback copy of Cormac McCarthy's All the Pretty Horses at the Intimate Bookshop. First-year interns weren't supposed to have time to read novels, but she made time. At least, she promised to make time tonight. The late April night was so fine, so perfect in every way, that Kate considered stopping off at Spanky's on the corner of Columbia and Franklin. She might sit at the bar and just read her book. There was absolutely no way she would let herself meet somebody on a school night, which meant most nights for her. She usually had Saturdays off, but by then she was too bush to deal with pre- and post-mating rituals. It had been that way ever since she and Peter McGrath had severed their on-again, off-again relationship. Peter was 38, a doctor of history, and close to brilliant. He was handsome as sin, and way too self-absorbed for her taste. The breakup had been messier than she had expected. They weren't even friends now. It had been 4 months without Peter now, pun intended. Not good, but not in the top 10 worst things she'd had to deal with. And besides, she knew the breakup was really her fault and not Peter's. Breaking up with lovers was a problem she had. It was part of her secret past. Secret present? Secret future? Kate McTiernan raised her wristwatch to her face. It was a funky Mickey Mouse model that her sister Carol Ann had given her, and it was a swell little timekeeper. It was also a reminder to herself, never get a big head because you're a doctor now. Damn. Her farsightedness was getting worse. At almost 31 years old. She was an old lady. She'd been the grand dame of the University of North Carolina Medical School. It was already 9:30, past her bedtime. Kate decided to pass on Spanky's and head back to the hacienda. She'd heat up some 4th-degree chili and maybe have hot chocolate with about an inch topping of marshmallow fluff. Curling up in bed with some junk food, Cormac McCarthy, and maybe R.E.M. didn't sound half bad, actually. Like many of the students at Chapel Hill, as opposed to the wealthier crowd up Tobacco Road at Duke, Kate had a major cash flow problem. She lived in a 3-room apartment that was the top floor of a frame house, a North Carolina country house. All the paint was peeling, and the house looked as if it were molting. It was at the ass end of Pittsboro Street in Chapel Hill. She had gotten a good deal on the rent. The first thing she had noticed about the neighborhood were the exquisite trees. They were old and stately hardwoods, not pines. Their long branches reminded her of the arms and fingers of wizened old women. She called her street Old Ladies' Lane. Where else would the old lady of the medical school live? Kate arrived home at about 9:45. Nobody was living downstairs in the house that she rented from a widowed lady who lived in Durham. "I'm home. It's me, Kate," she called to the family of mice who lived somewhere behind the refrigerator. She couldn't bring herself to exterminate them. "Did you miss me? You guys eat yet?" She flipped on the overhead kitchen light and listened to the irritating electric buzz that she hated. Her eyes caught the blow-up of a quote from one of her med school teachers. Medical students have to practice humility. Well, she was definitely practicing humility. Inside her small bedroom, Kate pulled on a wrinkled black polo shirt that she never ever bothered to iron. Ironing clothes was not a priority these days. It was one reason to have a man around, though, someone to clean, maintain, take out the trash, cook, iron. She was fond of a particular old feminist line, "A woman without a man is like a fish without a bicycle." Kate yawned, just thinking about the 16-hour day that would start for her at 5 the next morning. Damn it, she loved her life. Loved it. She fell onto the creaking double bed that was covered with plain white sheets. The only flourish was a couple of colored chiffon scarves which hung from the bedpost. She canceled her order for chili and hot chocolate with marshmallow fluff, and she set All the Pretty Horses on top of unread copies of Harper's and The New Yorker. Kate flipped off her lamp and was asleep in 5 seconds. End of wonderfully illuminating discussion with herself for the night. Kate McTiernan had no idea, no suspicion that she was being watched, that she had been followed ever since she walked down crowded, colorful Franklin Street, that she had been chosen. Dr. Kate was next. Tick-tock. Chapter